So when I was getting back into reading around 2018, 2019, I did, I think, what most people would do, and I Googled must-read books, the 100 best books of all time, those kinds of things to figure out where I should start my reading journey. I knew that I liked fantasy and sci-fi, but I really did want to, broaden my horizon and see what else was out there. And so I did come across a list that is books that you must read at least once before you die. It's a Goodreads list, and I wanted to go through it now after it's been quite a while, see which books I have read, and if I think they are really books you must read at least once in your lifetime. So the first book on the list is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, and this happens to be one of my favorite books of all time. I don't know exactly where it ranks, but it is definitely in the top 10, a 5-star book for me. And I think it is an extremely popular book that most people have read. I will say, I do think this is a book that everyone should read. There's just a charm to this book, and I think it also teaches some really nice life lessons. Obviously, it takes place in a not so great time period in American history, and I think there are just some lessons that can be picked up from there. Atticus Finch is, kind of a legendary character for me, probably one of my favorite characters of all time. I actually also saw this in a play form, and it was really awesome as well. Book number 2 is Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. This is another book that I have read, and it is another book that I think people should read. Now, I'm not saying that everybody should read all of the Harry Potter series, but I do think you should at least give the first one a chance. I do think, once again, there's a charm to this book, and this series was such a cultural phenomenon, especially when I was growing up, that I don't know if we'll ever see another book series like that. I think, we see really popular things like Fourth Wing was all over the place, but I still think it was very niche. Like if I went and asked my mom what Fourth Wing was, she would probably have no idea. If at the time you had asked pretty much anybody if they knew about Harry Potter, especially as the series had gone on a little bit, everybody knew what Harry Potter was. I mean, people were standing in line at midnight at Barnes & Nobles and everything to get these books. And so I think you owe yourself to at least read the first one. Even if fantasy isn't for you, I think you should just it's one of those pop culture things that I feel like most people should be a part of. Book number 3 is Pride and Prejudice. This is another book I have read, and I think this is a classic example of a book that I should go back and reread. I was not ready to read this book when I was reading just for pure enjoyment. I wasn't trying to get anything else, and I don't think I was ready to handle a book that was written this long ago and had all the social commentaries that go along with Pride and Prejudice. I will say, I don't know if this is like a must read. I think Jane Austen is a must read author, but I'm not sure that Pride and Prejudice is like a must read. I do think you should read at least one of her many novels, and I think most people would probably point you to this one. It does seem to be her most popular, but I'm not sure in the grand scheme of must read that this is one, which I'm sure some people are definitely going to disagree with me. But like I'm saying, I think she's an incredibly important author, but I think any of her books in her catalog are probably worth it, and not necessarily just Pride and Prejudice. Next up, we have a very different kind of book, and that is The Diary of a Young Girl, which is Anne Frank's diary. I have read this, but I read it when I was so young. I don't think I can really comment much on it. This is another one of those ones that I should probably go reread. I'm sure there's all kinds of just, honestly horrific things that happen in this, which isn't normally what I'm going for in my reading, but I do think it is important to experience those kinds of things. So I'm gonna give myself like half a point for this one because I did read it, but I think it was for school and it was so long ago, I don't really have any memories of it. And in the number 5 spot, we have George Orwell, and not with 1984, but with Animal Farm. I will say, between those two books, I would point people towards 1984 more than Animal Farm. I have read it, like I said, and I thought it was okay, but I read 1984 before Animal Farm, and I think these books kind of have the effect of, if you read one before the other, you're gonna like whichever one you read first a little bit more. Obviously, this is very coded language. Things are representing other things that are going on in the political time. I will say, you probably should read either Animal Farm. I think I already said this, but just in case I didn't, you should read one or the other, and I would say 1984 is the one that I would point most people to. In the number 6 spot, we have another book I have read, so I'm doing pretty well so far on the number I have read, and that is The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint. I'm not gonna get the rest of that correct. And I read this on a plane to Las Vegas, and I don't think that was, or was it to Denver? One of those two. I read it on a plane, which I think was a mistake because I did not enjoy my time with this book. I also think I read an audio version of it, and the audio narrator had a very heavy accent, French accent, and I think that also maybe really affected my enjoyment of this book, because after I read it and I said I didn't like it, I got so much feedback from people I know who are like, how do you not like that? And how it's just like a great kid story but has stuff for adults. So unfortunately for me, I'm gonna say you don't need to read it. I think it's one you can definitely skip over, but I think there might be some people who disagree with me, and if you do, let me know down in the comments below. I mentioned 1984, and that is in the number 7 spot. I have also read 1984. Like I said, Animal Farm, 1984. I think you should read one of them. I don't know I would say I think you should read 1984 much more than you should read Animal Farm, but I think one of those two kind of fills that niche when it comes to reading. Number 8, one of the great American novels, as people like to put it, and that is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. I have read this, and I am going to say that this is not necessarily one that you need to read. I think there are other great American novels that kind of fill this same niche. I know this is one that loves to be taught in school, and I think that probably put me off of it at the time. I remember thinking it was okay. So once again, I should probably count this as like a half because it was so long ago. I don't really remember it to the level I probably should to judge it like this, but this feels like one of those academic books that if it wasn't pushed so hard on you in like high school, or this is a high school book, I don't know if it would have the staying power, and I would love for somebody to explain to me why I'm so wrong by saying that. Next up is the first book on this list that I have not read, so I can't really comment too much on if I think you should read it or not, but that is The Catcher in the Rye, and this is a very famous book. I'm kind of surprised I didn't have to read it in school. Let me know your thoughts on it. I kind of held off on reading this one. I would like to read it at some point, but for whatever reason, just not a super high priority for me. In the number 10 spot, it looks like it's just counting The Lord of the Rings as a whole. And this is a series that I have some mixed feelings about. I like it, but so many people love it that I feel like people think I hate it. And that's not true. I like it. I think it's good. I do have problems with it, but I'm just not at the mountaintop with everybody else. I'm like at base camp still, but I don't not like it. I feel like I get misconstrued with that. It's good. I gave them 3 stars. I think they're fine. They're just, some people love these so much. And I will say, I do think, same kind of feeling with Harry Potter. You should probably read either The Hobbit, or I don't know if this is counting The Hobbit or if it's counting just the 3 books that make up the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I would say you probably should read at least the first book or The Hobbit. Once again, it kind of has that same thing of these are such important books for an entire genre that maybe they deserve a little bit of a look at. And also they are very much a piece of pop culture. They just kind of have that same feel that you need to at least kind of experience it. Honestly, I think you can probably watch the movies and be fine. And that's honestly what I would recommend. Instead of reading the books, just go watch like the extended edition of the movies and you'll kind of be in the know, because I think most people, when they talk about it, are talking about the movie. In the number 11 spot, we have The Book Thief. This is another book that I have not read. I've heard about this book forever. Once again, it seems like one of those classics. I think this is one that I probably should have had to have read in school, but didn't for whatever reason. So once again, can't comment too much on if I think you should read it or not, but according to Goodreads, it is one that you should. And here we go. We have Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. I have not read this one either, so once again, can't say too much. I do know that she is a very influential author. What's the other book? Is she the one who wrote Wuthering Heights, or am I confusing her with somebody else? But those kind of seem to be like, if that's the same author, and hopefully I'm right, but maybe, you should probably read from her catalog. I don't know if necessarily you need to read this one in particular, but who knows, I haven't read them myself yet. In the 13th spot is The Chronicles of Narnia. I will say, and it looks like it is counting the whole series, I have read all 7 of those books, and I will say, I don't know if they have the same cultural impact as something like Harry Potter or The Lord of the Rings. I feel like if you were in that area or that genre of fantasy, these are probably ones you can skip. I personally enjoyed my time with them, and they're probably a good one to introduce when your kids are younger. I know some people really are put off by the heavy Christian themes in that series, but I think in general it's a good enough time for kids, and some of that's just going to go over their head anyway. But I think you can probably skip them, as much as that kind of hurts me to say, because I do think they have some value in them. In the number 14 spot is Lord of the Flies by William Golding. I had to read this one in school as well, so it's another one of those, and I will say, I don't think I really enjoyed my time with it. I think there are obviously some social themes that it's trying to hint on, and there are some ideas that it's trying to play with, but I'm going to put this in the I don't think you need to read it category. Obviously, school boards across the country have thought the opposite and think it's a very important book to teach, but I'm going to put it in the you don't need to read it category. Next up, we have, well, it's not necessarily a straightforward novel, it's really a play, and that is Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare. And I'm going to kind of use my same excuse that I've used with some of the other books here, where I'm not sure you necessarily need to read Romeo and Juliet, though it does have, it's permeated pop culture to such a point that you might want to at least have some idea of what actually happened in the story. But I do think you should expose yourself to some of William Shakespeare's work, whatever you choose that to be. I think it's important to kind of have that little bit of knowledge put into your repertoire. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, I've kind of already said my piece on Harry Potter. I obviously have read that one. Next up is The Kite Runner. I have not read that book, so I can't say too much about it. I actually don't even really know what it's about, so I'm just going to kind of say Goodreads thinks you should read it. In the number 18 spot, we have The Giver, which apparently there are more Giver books that I didn't know about. I have read The Giver, and I do think this is an interesting one. I'm not sure if I would recommend, like, say this is a must read once in your lifetime. I know people really love this book, and this is maybe another one where I need to revisit it now because I read it so long ago that, I mean, I only remember some like very vague details of it. So maybe I will say that I have read it, but it's been too long that I can't really give a strong you should or shouldn't read it or once in your lifetime. Next is The Giving Tree. And funny enough, this is one of the earliest books I can remember personally reading. The earliest one I can remember reading is Are You My Mother, which is like a kid's story with like a bird and stuff in it. That is the earliest book memory I have. The Giving Tree is another really early one, and I think this is absolutely a book that kids should read, once in their life. This is, I don't know, it's just the message of this book I think is really good. It's really simple. It's one of those like staple kids books, I feel like. Another pretty staple kids book is Charlotte Webb by E.B. White. I don't know if I've read this. I think I have definitely watched like some kind of movie adaptation of it, but I'm gonna go ahead and say I don't think you really need to read that one. I don't think it's a once in a lifetime read. In the 21st spot is Little Women. I have not read this book, but I know it has a pretty big following and everything. Obviously there's been TV adaptations and movies and everything, but I can't really comment because I haven't read it. Next up is The Hunger Games, and I will say, as much as I did enjoy The Hunger Games when it came out, I definitely did. I have read this one. I don't think it's something that you absolutely need to read. Once again, you could have that argument of pop culture, especially we just got another book announced and another movie announced because of that book. So it does seem to still have like some staying power in pop culture, but I think for most people, like, you can probably skip The Hunger Games. In the 23rd spot, we have The Hobbit. I've kind of already said my piece on Lord of the Rings. I do think you should read at least The Hobbit or the first book of the trilogy. In the 24th spot is Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. And this is one that I actually am definitely going to agree. I think this is definitely a book that everybody should read at least one time. This is a book that I have very high in my rankings. Heartbreaking book. It just, Steinbeck, once again, I guess maybe you could argue that there are other books. I know East of Eden is probably one that more people would argue is like a must read, but for me, I haven't read East of Eden, so I can't actually say for sure, but to me, Of Mice and Men is definitely a book that I would say you should absolutely read. Next up is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, and this might be slightly a controversial take, but while I have read Fahrenheit 451 and I had a decent time with it, I think that this book can kind of be replaced by one of the other dystopian stories that are being told at the time. I didn't click with this book nearly as much as I did with 1984, A Brave New World, even We, which is another, sci-fi dystopian world. This one probably is the lowest one down of all my rankings. So I do think that you can probably substitute or I guess I should also mention Animal Farm here again. I think one of those like 5 books kind of filled this niche. So your mileage may vary. Once again, I'm still going to point you to 1984. I don't think, because it didn't work for me, I can't recommend it as much. Number 26 is Green Eggs and Ham by Dr. Seuss. And this is an interesting one. There's a couple books. I don't know if I would say any Dr. Seuss book is like a must read. I think there are plenty of kids books that they're all kind of silly and have that whimsical feel to them. Obviously, I know Dr. Seuss is probably one of the best selling of all time and everything about it, but I'm not sure I would say any Dr. Seuss book is a book you absolutely have to read. I know I haven't read most of them. I wasn't super exposed to them as a kid. In the number 27 spot, we have another Harry Potter book. Already kind of said my piece on that. And at number 28, we have Wuthering Heights with Emily Bronte. I kind of already said how I felt about that as well. In the number 20, and yeah, I have not read Wuthering Heights yet either. It is on my list though. And then in the 29th spot, we have Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. I don't even think I've watched this movie all the way through, so I definitely have not read the book, so I won't really mention anything here. It seems like one of those classics, and it maybe has the ability because it transports you into a different world that maybe it's so wild and crazy that it is worth reading, but I can't really say too much. In the 30th position, we have the Picture of Dorian Gray, not a picture, and I have read this. This is by Oscar Wilde. This is kind of a classic Gothic story, and while this is a book I really liked and I do recommend to a lot of people, I'm not sure if I would say this is like a must read. I'm not sure what I would define as a must read, but for me, The Picture of Dorian Gray doesn't fit into it. Like, that's not a book that maybe I'll have to make a list of books that I think are a must read after making this video. In the 31st spot, we have the Night Trilogy, book number 1 by Elie Wiesel? I have no idea what this book is. I would love for somebody to educate me on what this book is because it made this top 50 list and I have never heard of it. In the 32nd spot, we have Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell. I have heard so much about this book. At some point, I want to read it. I know it takes place during like Reconstruction after the Civil War, so I'm sure there's all kinds of themes and stuff that happen here. Without having read it, I don't know if I can say it's one that you should, but a lot of people would probably argue that it does have a lot of value in it. And then I think another contingent of people would argue that it is full of like very negative stereotypes about specific people and that, it doesn't have value. So it's one of those ones where I'm probably going to need to read it to really make up my mind for myself. In the 33rd spot, we have the Bible. So funny enough, I have read all of the Bible. I have a minor in religion, so it wasn't focused in Christianity, but I did take an Old Testament and a New Testament class for that, and I had to read every book in the Bible, so I can say that. I will say, if you're not a religious person, I think there is a lot of value in studying some of the text, especially if you look at it from either a English perspective, which is funny to say, seeing how it's translated from like Aramaic and other languages. But I do think it has value from that perspective. Or if you want to look at it in a historic perspective, which is what a lot of my religion classes focus on, were the history aspects of the religion during the time. I think there is a lot of value in reading a lot of components of the Bible. In the 34th spot, we have Harry Potter again. Already said my piece on that. This is going to be a hot take for a lot of people. The number 35th spot is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the first book by Douglas Adams. I don't like this book. I think, and this is how I feel about this book, I don't like it. It does not work for me whatsoever, but it is the perfect book for what it's trying to achieve. So that might sound funny, like I'm trying to have it both ways, but no, this is a book I do not like. I don't think this book is funny. I read this book, I don't think I smiled, which, is crazy to most people. I know most people absolutely love this absurdist humor and just think it's hilarious and all the satirical stuff that's happening, and the same people that like Monty Python like this, and I don't like Monty Python. So it's definitely a me issue. I don't click with it. So for me, no, I don't think this is a book that you should spend your time reading. In the 32nd spot, or in the 36th spot, is Hamlet by William Shakespeare. I already kind of gave my little Shakespeare spiel there, where you should probably read probably a couple of his plays, or at least maybe see them. See them is probably better than just sitting and reading them. 37th, we have another Harry Potter book, so we'll skip over there. Yes, I have read that. I think I forgot to say which of these I have read, but that's okay. At the 38th spot, we have The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and I have read this, and I will say I enjoyed The Adventures of Tom Sawyer significantly more than The Adventures of Huck Finn. I think I'm definitely in the minority there. I think this is another one of those great American novels that people point to. I will say I think you should probably read this or The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. I think it just is an important part of like a lens into America at a specific time in history. So I would say yes. Personally, I am going to say that you should read Tom Sawyer, but I think Huck Finn is probably the more important of the two. I think it faces some more systematic and social issues of the time. So at the 39th spot are Fairy Stories by J.R.R. Tolkien. I don't know if these are referring to translations he did, and if that's the case, I would be pretty interested in reading some of those translations. I know he was kind of obsessed with a lot of that stuff, and some of his earlier work before Lord of the Rings, I think, had to do a lot with fairy tales and stuff. I know he also has like a translation of Beowulf maybe or something, so I would probably be more interested in reading that. Obviously, I haven't yet, so I can't say if it is something you should read. Same with the book in the 40th spot, Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. I've not read this. I feel like this is probably one that I should read, and so I'm going to say it's probably one you should read as well, just from like the context I know about it and how important it is. Obviously, the play is very, very famous and everything. But in the 41st spot is The Alchemist by Pablo Coelho. I'm sure that is very wrong, but for me, this is a book when I first read it, I thought very highly about. And then pretty much as soon as I finished it, I was like, this is not as thought-provoking as I think it thinks it is. I think this kind of, for some people, it is probably very helpful. I think this is absolutely a book you can skip though. I do not think this is a book that everybody should read once in their life. In the 42nd spot is Brave New World, which I think I mentioned earlier when I was talking about 1984, Animal Farm, Fahrenheit 451, and this. I think Brave New World is probably one you can skip. Personally, I enjoyed it, and I think it definitely asks some very interesting questions about like society and eugenics and some things like that. But once again, if you're gonna kind of look for that dystopian world, I'm still gonna point you to 1984 every time. Now, here's a book that I do think everybody should read, and this is Crime and Punishment. Now, this is another book that I think I personally need to go back to, because when I first read it, it's another one of those books where I don't think I was really ready for it, and I think that now I would enjoy it a lot more and get a lot more out of it than I would. So I think I will have to put the caveat on. You probably need to have a decent idea of what you like in a book and go into this with the correct mindset. But I think that this is a very fascinating book that looks at human psychology and like effects. And yeah, it's a very interesting book. Book number 44 is The Help. I have not read that. I think I have seen clips of the movie. It seems kind of funny, so maybe at some point I will read that. Book number 45 is The Secret Garden. Once again, this is one of those books that I have no idea about, so if you're a big The Secret Garden fan, definitely let me know. Book number 46 is Memories of a Geisha. I think this is on my list. I think I mentioned that I read a book called Snow Country a while ago, and somebody told me that I should read this book. So once again, I don't really know what it's about, so I can't really tell you if you should. At the 47th spot, we have another Narnia book. I already kind of said you could skip those. Number 48 is The Odyssey, and I have read this, and I do think this is one of those books that you should read. I think it's so important to so much of like storytelling that I think you're doing yourself a disservice to not go and read this in the Iliad. I think it's just kind of one of those stories that permeates more than you think it does, and should be read in some form. I'm not saying you need to like become a scholar to read it, or to read Homer in general, but I do think having some exposure to some of those Greek I almost said Greek retellings because they're so popular now, but some of those Greek stories are very important. Book number 49 is a book that is very close to my heart. I reread this book every year at Christmas time, and that is A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. So yes, I'm absolutely going to tell you that everybody should read this book, and I do implore everybody to read it like the week of Christmas. If not, I think I normally try to read it on Christmas Eve is when I try to fit it in. It's super short, and I don't know, sometimes it's important to just remember, do what you can, and just all those things of like enjoying life with what you have. And obviously there's so much negativity in the world and things are hard, totally get that. But I do think it is just one of those books that can help you reset your mind and put you on a path of better thought and just feeling better about yourself and the world that you're living in. And then at the 50th spot is The Cat in the Hat, which I kind of already mentioned. I don't think you really need to read any Dr. Seuss book. I guess if you're going to read this one, or this or the other one that's on the list, those are probably the two you should read. But for me, no, I have read The Cat in the Hat. I've read a lot more on this list than I thought I have, which I'm pretty happy with, but I don't think anything from Dr. Seuss is all that important. So that is how I stack up on this list. I'd love to know how many of these you have read, how many of them you think you should read, and what are some glaring books that you think are missing from this list. I didn't think about ahead of time, so I don't have any off the top of my head, but definitely let me know some books that you think are missing from this list that absolutely should be on it. But as always, have a good one.